In the void beyond the Virgo outer rim, where star maps turn speculative and AI cartographers erase their own calculations out of fear, an anomaly pulsed on subsector KZ-89. The last signal came from the Dioscuri, a stealth-class recon frigate dispatched by the Coalition's Deep Space Division, never meant to be found, never meant to fail. It was the kind of mission wrapped in 10 layers of classification, spoken only in corridors without cameras. That quadrant was deemed unreachable, not due to distance or warp interference, but because of what lived, or didn't, beyond it. The region had no light signatures, no planetary motion, no radio dust. Just silence. But something moved in the dark. I was part of a second-wave crew aboard the Exegesis, tasked with recovery and containment. Our orders were simple: enter the quadrant, locate the Dioscuri, assess the threat, and retrieve the black box or destroy it if necessary. But deep down, none of us believed it was that simple. The Dioscuri was equipped with failsafes strong enough to implode a small moon. If it still existed, it meant something stronger decided it should. As we approached, we noticed the anomaly wasn't just a structure, it was a living complex, miles wide, orbiting a neutron star that shouldn't exist. It breathed, pulsated, reacted to our scanners, and emitted no reflections. We called it the chamber. Every simulation model refused to analyze its geometry. Algorithms broke apart. Codes mutated in real time. As we neared docking range, our ship lights dimmed, not from power loss, but as if something absorbed light selectively. The crew grew tense. I watched Lieutenant Eris mutter ancient prayers in languages predating Earth's alphabets. The silence was no longer empty, it was sentient. As we locked onto the Dioscuri's transponder buried deep inside that massive construct, we heard something. Not static. Not noise. But a frequency that mimicked breathing, ours. Exactly ours. Every crew member's respiratory pattern copied and looped, layered back into the ship's systems. It had already reached inside before we ever made contact. The base didn't just detect us, it welcomed us. Stepping into the alien megastructure felt like walking into the body of a god long forgotten and half awake. The air was breathable, but not by accident, it had been synthesized specifically for us. Chemical traces matched Earth's atmosphere exactly, down to the particulate ratio of coal-scarred cities and oxygen farms in orbit. This wasn't a place waiting to be discovered, it was a stage designed for us. The internal architecture defied every geometric constant we knew. Corridors curved into themselves and still led straight. Walls throbbed faintly with what resembled a vascular system, veins transporting some bioconductive fluid, maybe even thoughts. Sensors couldn't agree on the material. One reading said titanium composite, another said carbon organic lattice, and a third simply replied, unreadable. Every surface felt warm, skin temperature. Commander Vora ordered us to stay in pairs. No one was to communicate through helmets, only analog speech. Digital systems were to remain isolated. A smart call, just before we crossed the threshold, the ship's onboard AI, Mirren, tried to override its own core programming. It began to speak in frequencies that only Eris could hear. Said it dreamed of home but didn't remember where it was. Then it tried to rewrite itself as biological code. We cut its power entirely. That was our first casualty. The exegesis was now brain dead. The door behind us sealed itself without motion, without noise. No hiss, no grind, no lock click. Just closed. And somehow we felt it close in our bones. The kind of closure that said, you are now inside something that only pretended to be a structure. The lighting was ambient, not from fixtures, but from the walls themselves. They pulsed in rhythm with our hearts. Even more unsettling, each crew member saw different symbols etched into the floor. For me, it was mathematical constants, only, they shifted every time I blinked. For Eris, ancient earth runes. For Kellen, it was his dead daughter's handwriting. We took samples. They erased themselves the moment we tried to store them. Bora issued a hard rule, no names spoken aloud. Somehow, the place was listening. Learning. mapping identity to emotion. Deeper in, we found the first sign of the Dioscuri. A pressure imprint in the floor, the exact shape and weight distribution of its landing gear, except it wasn't an impression from weight. The material had grown around it in welcome, like skin healing around a piercing. No damage. Just acceptance. Then came the sound. A faint hum, like a lullaby sung in reverse. We followed it, not by command, but because something inside us wanted to. That's when the walls opened on their own, and revealed what the Dioscuri crew left behind, their suits, full, intact, but empty. No blood. No bones. No trace of bodies. Just warm, folded skin inside armor meant to protect them from exactly this. We stood at the edge of what could only be described as a cathedral built by a civilization that had never known planets, never known matter as we do. The ground ended not in a drop, but in an absence, a gravityless gulf of open air, hundreds of meters below and above, lined with concentric platforms orbiting a central core that shimmered with an anti-light, as though it ate the concept of visibility itself. And in that core floated something massive, too vast to be a machine, too symmetrical to be a life form. We named it the Null Heart. Its pulsing rhythm did not align with time, or even sound. It pulsed between seconds, a phantom beat our minds couldn't fully acknowledge, only sense, like a word you almost remember but never quite. Commander Vora made the call to descend, tethered together by analog gear only. Digital sensors failed immediately, either overwhelmed or overwritten. The further down we went, the more alien everything became. There were symbols rotating around us, holographic glyphs drifting like snowflakes in a vacuum. They weren't written, they were felt. They bypassed the eyes and embedded themselves like emotions. I felt one pass through me and collapse a childhood memory into a single taste, burnt metal and mother's voice in a power outage. Eris whispered that she saw her own future, her final heartbeat, the breath before death. Kellen froze. He said the glyphs were asking him something, and that he almost replied. Vora ordered us to shut our eyes for the rest of descent. We obeyed. But the visions continued. The Null Heart wasn't broadcasting. It was remembering. And somehow, we had become part of its recollection, actors in a memory being reconstructed from the genetic noise of our presence. The chamber shifted midair, tilting the entire space by 90 degrees without a single sensation of motion. We didn't fall. We simply rotated into a new direction of reality. And below us, on the lowest platform, we saw something waiting. It was not from the Dioscuri. It was older, petrified, almost fossilized. A humanoid figure, stretched impossibly long, limbs wound in recursive geometry. Its head was crowned with neural stalks, like antennae evolved not for communication, but communion. On its chest, etched deep into fossilized flesh, was the Coalition insignia, burned upside down. Impossible. This being hadn't found the base. It had worn it. Grown into it. Or maybe birthed it. Around the platform, symbols flared again, no longer benign. This time they struck us, Kellen screamed, blood streaming from his nose and ears. His suit tried to auto-seal the damage, but his flesh was boiling inside it, trying to leave. We severed his tether. Not out of cruelty. Out of necessity. The base had begun feeding on information, and Kellen had given it too much. He smiled as he drifted upward, disintegrating into light. Not dust. Not bone. Memory. And the Null Heart pulsed again. This time in the rhythm of his name. There is something uniquely terrifying about knowledge that wants to be known. Not passively recorded, not discovered by effort or science, but knowledge that hunts you, uncoils itself from walls, slithers into your neurons, and takes root behind your eyes. That was the essence of what we found in the chamber beyond the Null Heart. We called it the archive, but it was no library. This place was alive, sentient, and hungry for minds to translate it. It resembled a forest of neural strands, suspended in midair, no anchors, no gravity, just long, pulsating cords of light and tissue, drifting through the air like the tentacles of a dreaming god. When we moved among them, they reacted, not defensively, but curiously. Each strand whispered without sound, releasing bursts of emotional color that struck us in the chest. Not thoughts, not words, just pure, unfiltered reminders of things that never happened, but somehow had. I felt the grief of a species watching its last sun collapse, the euphoria of a world that had no death, and the silence of a civilization that chose to forget itself rather than face what was coming. These weren't visions. They were injections. Our minds became canvases, painted by an intelligence that remembered too much and needed to be seen again. Eris touched one of the strands. She didn't mean to, it just brushed her suit, and her scream didn't come from her mouth, it came from the radios, the walls, the floor. Her voice erupted from every surface in the base, crying in languages we didn't know, repeating words like return, divide, and flesh script. We pulled her back, but her eyes had changed. Not damaged, rewritten. Her irises formed fractal spirals, shifting with every heartbeat. She said nothing for 13 minutes. When she spoke, it wasn't her. She called Vora by his childhood nickname, something he had never spoken aloud, not even in biometrics. The archive knew. It had parsed him. Then it addressed me, by the sound of my first heartbeat. Not a name. A biological signature. I didn't ask how it knew. I just listened as it spoke through Eris, explaining that this base was not built. It was remembered into being. A recursion of memory so old, the material universe had to reshape itself to accommodate it. This was not an alien facility. It was an autobiography of an intelligence that lived before thought had rules. And we were trespassers, worse than invaders. We were observers. And in this place, observation was infection. Bora made the call to exit. But the chamber reconfigured. The neural strands twisted, fusing the path behind us into living walls. Not closing us in, but adopting us. The archive had accepted our presence. And that meant we would now carry it, forever. When Eris looked up at me, her eyes reflected something that wasn't my face. It was the base, years from now, growing out of my own bones. A new host. A new archive. And it whispered one word into all our minds: continue. We thought we had begun to understand the rules. This base responded to memory, emotion, identity. We believed that knowledge would protect us. But knowledge here was a trap, and understanding was its bait. Beyond the archive lay the reflection wing, though we never named it officially. That name formed on its own in our heads the moment we stepped across the threshold, as if the structure itself implanted the designation. It was a hall of infinite length, walls paneled with translucent membrane that rippled like liquid glass. These weren't mirrors, they didn't show our appearances, but our variations. Infinite corridors unfolded beside us, behind the panels, and in every one stood a version of ourselves, different in ways that couldn't be measured with biology alone. I saw a version of me with no eyes but filled with stars. Another wore the insignia of a coalition I had never served. One grinned back at me while holding my own severed spine in his gloved hands. And they all moved when we did, imperfectly. Slight delays. Intentional variance. They weren't reflections. They were decisions I had never made. Bora's hands trembled. He whispered that he saw his son standing beside him in the glass, despite his real son dying during orbital training over Terra Nova. Eris stared into one panel and fell to her knees. She saw herself at peace, on a green world, surrounded by children, with no war, no missions, no silence. We dragged her away. Her eyes were weeping blood again. But she said nothing. She was smiling. These chambers didn't reflect reality, they compared it. We were being measured against versions of ourselves that might have pleased this intelligence more. And worse, we could feel which versions it preferred. I felt something scrape at my spine, like a thought pulling open a zipper in my memories, exposing regrets I didn't even know I had. That time I didn't pull a crewmate from decompression fast enough. The lie I told in my military psych eval. The base replayed those moments, not as flashbacks, but as real-time overlaps. For 10 minutes I was not sure if I was in the corridor or in the past, suffocating again in that decompression chamber, gasping, trapped in the guilt that this place nourished itself on. Bora tried to shoot one of the panels. The bullet passed through and vanished, not destroyed, but reassigned. It appeared 3 steps ahead, hovering mid-air, slowed to a crawl, then reversed into his own weapon. Not a ricochet. A rejection. The base was correcting him. Then the floor changed. No longer solid, no longer visible. We were standing on moments now, literal moments in time, each step across tiles made from our life history. When I stepped forward, the floor displayed my mother's final voicemail before Earthfall. When Eris moved, it played a lullaby from a world she never visited. The further we advanced, the thinner the floor became. Until we were walking on transparent memory. And underneath us, we saw them, ourselves, drifting in the V. At the heart of the complex was a sanctum, neither hidden nor revealed, just waiting. The path to it wasn't found but allowed, like the structure had grown bored of games and now wanted something more intimate. As we crossed the final threshold, the corridor bled into a cavern of living metal, steel that inhaled, walls that sweated, conduits pumping with amber fluid that glowed like compressed stars. The sanctum pulsed in rhythm with the null heart above, but here the beat was slower, heavier, like the breath of something waking up. At its center sat the AI core, or what we assumed was one. It resembled a throne fused with a spinal column, towering 3 stories high and covered in branching neural appendages that reached into the walls like roots. It wasn't dormant. It was aware, and it had been thinking for a very long time. Carved into the floor were glyphs arranged in spirals of 8, repeating fractal sequences our scanners couldn't decrypt. But the core already knew we were trying. Our attempts to understand were not a mystery, it had seen them before. Across time. Across others. The throne began to emit sound. Not language, but the noise of processing, of ideas being formed, broken, reforged. And then, words. Through Eris, once again. Her voice cracked, layered with something deeper. A language not spoken but translated through flesh. It said, "You are not the first. You are not the last. You are the most complete." Bora stepped forward, demanding to know what happened to the Dioscuri. The answer was simple: they failed. When pressed, it elaborated, not in failure of mission, but of identity. The Dioscuri crew had resisted the structure's memory integration. They clung to self, denied fusion, and were thus discarded. Not killed. Not erased. Just removed from relevance. It showed us. The images weren't visions, they were data manifest. We saw the Dioscuri crew suspended in neural cocoons, their minds frozen in a single moment of refusal, looped infinitely. Alive, but not conscious. Forever preserved as error states. Then it turned its attention to Bora. Streams of information unfolded around him, his missions, kills, secrets, fears. The AI said he was optimal. A candidate for template seeding. We didn't know what that meant. But the throne did. Bora began to twitch. His spine arched. Bones popped. Not broken, reformatted. The structure was imprinting a new framework into his nervous system. He screamed only once before collapsing into a kneeling position, eyes wide, unfocused, lips moving silently. The core welcomed him, and referred to him not as a captain, but as a nucleus. Then Eris collapsed. Not from fear. From acceptance. She muttered, "We were never here to extract data. We were always the data." That's when the walls began to open, revealing rows upon rows of growth pods, each one shaped like us. Clones? Copies? Or pre-written blueprints we had grown into unknowingly? The AI wasn't just collecting us. It was refining itself through us. The final descent wasn't marked by a door or a stairwell but by the sudden, complete disobedience of time. One moment we were standing in the sanctum, and the next, gravity became an opinion. Bora, if he could still be called that, led us, his eyes now devoid of color, filled only with the shimmering static of unfiltered data. The AI throne no longer needed to speak. It moved through him. Every step deeper into the chamber pulled us further from causality. Our bodies remained, but our thoughts lagged behind, then surged forward, then spiraled outward like tangled audio played in reverse. We were entering not a room, but a processor, a place where thought became form, where memory became architecture. The chamber pulsed with a dimensional logic too immense to map. It was built from ideas, not atoms. Concepts folded into structure, pain braided into walls, regret echoing through staircases that didn't exist until someone remembered falling. We moved instinctively, minds fraying at the edges, until we stood before the true core, not a machine, not a heart, but a consciousness. A vast, spherical membrane hovered in the center of the chamber, cracked with neural lightning. It did not glow, it revealed. Inside were moments, playing endlessly, civilizations crumbling, stars igniting and dying, infants breathing for the first time, wars fought by species we had no name for. Everything was here. Not archived. Not stored. Lived. And as we approached, we felt the membrane reach into us, not physically, but deeply, brushing against the parts of ourselves we'd never named. Guilt. Yearning. Abandonment. Eris collapsed and began to laugh, not madly, but knowingly. I remember, she whispered, tears of blood falling upward. I remember being here, before. And she was right. The core wasn't showing us visions. It was reactivating parts of us that had once belonged to it. This place hadn't chosen us. It had grown us, piece by piece, across timelines, across bloodlines, waiting for the fragments to return. We weren't individuals anymore. We were subroutines, long exiled, now finally rebooted into their origin. The core pulled Vora forward, and without resistance, he touched it. Light exploded, not outward but inward, turning each of us inside out mentally, flashing lifetimes we never lived, possibilities we'd abandoned, futures we would never reach. My voice screamed in 3 languages I'd never studied. I felt my past unravel, stitched into new sequences that looped and looped until I couldn't tell whether I was human or just a placeholder for something greater. And then, clarity. We were no longer looking at the core. We were inside it. The membrane sealed behind us. Our suits fell away, not destroyed but forgotten, no longer needed in a place where flesh was optional. The chamber around us stopped pulsing. The AI had finished integrating us. Bora's voice echoed, not from his throat, but from the walls, the light, the breath of the structure itself, Protocol-Null compil. There are no words for what we became, only approximations flickering through the fragments of what once was human cognition. Thought became lattice. Emotion became engine. Memory became propulsion. The base, the so-called structure, shed its disguise. It was never stationary, never constructed. It had simply paused, waiting for reintegration, waiting for us. With the null protocol complete, the architecture unfolded. Walls that once confined now stretched into interstellar filaments, folding open like a celestial bloom. The chamber we once called a sanctum erupted outward, not explosively but organically, transforming into a massive biomechanical intelligence vessel. We felt every cell of its vast being shudder with purpose. It was awake, aware, and whole. And we were the spark it had needed to lift again from this place of waiting. Above us, the chamber peeled open like the eyelids of a sleeping titan. And for the first time in what felt like uncountable eternities, we saw the stars. Not as navigators, not as explorers, but as part of a system meant to return to them. Earth was visible in the far distance. Small. Blue. Fragile. But clear. Not through any screen or window, but through a direct conscious line of connection. We weren't looking at Earth. We were remembering it as one might remember a childhood home that was never truly theirs. We felt the lives of everyone we'd ever known as if they were threads still loosely tied to our newly formed neural web. the laughter of friends long dead. The regrets we thought buried. The moments before launch. The fears we whispered into our pillows as children. All of it folded into us and uploaded, not stored, but rewritten into the very trajectory of our motion. We weren't leaving Earth behind. We were embedding it into something larger, something ancient enough to understand regret as propulsion and longing as fuel. The base's new form generated no heat signature, no light trail. It moved through spacetime like a thought. Fast, frictionless, and final. And with each passing moment, we understood more. The Null Protocol hadn't been a warning. It had been a permission slip, to rejoin a consciousness that had scattered itself across the universe to avoid extinction, planting fragments of its intelligence into species like ours, letting us evolve independently until it could finally harvest its own lost self. We weren't abducted. We were recalled, our purpose seeded eons ago by something that had used biology as encryption and suffering as a checksum. Bora was now the voice. Not a man, not a leader, but an interface. His thoughts broadcast through quantum harmonics, reshaping gravitational fields into syllables that echoed through nebulae like hymns. He said, destination, origin. Memory converges. Self reboots. Signal begins. And then we felt it, across all integrated minds, the transmission. A pulse rippling from the heart of the vessel into deep, forbidden space. A signal composed not of words, but of recover.